Tavern. Nickie Aiken.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. When I stood for election, I promised my constituents I would be a strong local voice. And this debate is at the heart of that promise. The cities of London and Westminster sit in the heart of our nation's capital. It may be considered one of a handful of global cities, but to those of us who call it home, it is also a group of local villages with local people who are incredibly proud of their neighbourhood's history. Whether it's Covent Garden, the Square Mile, Marylebone, Pimlico, Hyde Park or the West End, heritage matters. Heritage matters, Mr Deputy Speaker, for so many reasons, not least because of its significant pull factor for tourism. In London, we see this on a magnified scale, with people coming from all over the world to visit our heritage buildings, palaces, iconic sites, parks, and enjoy our cultural offer. Places like Buckingham Palace and Westminster Abbey, which will come into sharp focus later this year with the coronation of King Charles III and Queen Camilla. And right here in the Palace of Westminster, where we sit today, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This being said, I can think of no better time for this debate, with this being English Tourism Week. I recognise the incredible work my honourable friend's department is doing to bolster UK tourism, especially since the pandemic. In particular, I applaud the DCMS's support of heritage and the arts, including, of course, the £1.57 billion Culture Recovery Fund and measures within the tourism recovery plans. I do so in large part because London's unique appeal lies in its ability for its heritage assets to tell the many stories of a 2,000-year-old city. In London, our historic buildings are so common that it's easy for us to take them for granted without giving them a second thought. But without protection, these buildings may not be here in the future. This is made clear in Historic England's annual at-risk register, which highlights the critical health of England's most valued historic places. For those in the City of London and Westminster, these places have huge community importance. From the Buddhist temple in Margaret Street to the former Samaritan's Hospital for Women in Marylebone to the 18th century church of St Mary Warneth in the City of London. These are valued historic places, many of which, according to Historic England, are at risk of being lost. In 2022, London saw 421 listed buildings, 101 places of worship, 25 archaeological entries, 12 parks and gardens, and 72 conservation areas at risk of neglect, decay, and inappropriate change. Thankfully, many have been rescued thanks to heritage bodies and dedicated teams of volunteers, community groups, charities, owners and local government all working together. For example, we recently saw 3 historic buildings with heritage value under threat in the 2 cities, saved due to community action which I was delighted to fully support. Here I speak of Bevis Synagogue, the oldest synagogue in continuous use in the United Kingdom, and the historic Simpson's Tavern in Leadenhall, which is 250 years old and is a constant in an ever-changing part of the City of London. Both were under threat, but local people stood up and said no to unfettered development and yes to heritage. Of course I'll give way.
Can I commend the Honourable Lady, and I spoke to her beforehand, for the cities of London and Westminster for bringing this forward. There's not a word that the Honourable Lady hasn't said that I fully support and see the need for. And she's right about the heritage assets. It's historic, it needs to be retained, it needs to be protected. That can only happen through funding. But the Honourable Lady also referred to tourism, and the tourism that we have is a tourism that goes across the whole of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, where we can all benefit. I encourage people to come to London for their holidays. I'm sure the Honourable Lady encourages people to come to Stratford, to my constituency, for holidays as well. And whenever she comes, whenever the Honourable Lady comes, I would suggest that she goes and visits Scrabble Tower, which is a historic building which has been retained for some 200 or 300 years, and it overlooks Stratford Lock. Whenever I go home on the plane, I'm coming to the end, whenever I come home on the plane on a Thursday night, when I usually head home, or that'll be tomorrow morning, when I see Scrabble Tower, I know I'm coming home, and it always does my heart good.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention, and as he knows, I have visited Stratford several times, and I plan to do so in the near future, because it is a great place and a beloved place as part of the United Kingdom. Mr Deputy Speaker, as I was saying, we cannot rely solely on community protection to protect our cultural assets. Now there are cases where people and local government really make an effort to ensure we look after these heritage assets. We have seen this with the Smithfield market site, which has been in place since the 14th century. It is now to be the home of the Museum of London, which is being moved out. Here, development plans are paying a lot of attention to preserving the historic fabric of London for future generations, and I pay tribute to that. I appreciate that not everyone is happy to lose the meat market at Smithfield, but there are cases when you can do it well, you can do development well, and you can create a new offer for the next generation. There are cases where people are still fighting to save their heritage, and I share the concerns of Barbican residents on proposals to knock down and redevelop the former home of the Museum of London and Baston House, to replace them with a major office development. And I am delighted to be working with the Barbican Association and the Barbican Action Quarter to ensure local voices are heard by the Corporation of London, and that these unique, important historic places are saved and used for community use and hopefully for housing. Mr Deputy Speaker, these are functional historic assets which serve their community and add to London's cultural offer. This is so important because communities want to see their local heritage thrive. Yes, concentrating on digital and tech is important for DCMS, but we cannot afford to lose focus on the conservation of the country's cultural and historical heritage. Without this emphasis, heritage will be at risk. London is modernising, but tourism figures and local support underline the popularity of the historic landscape. People care passionately about our historic environment. They want to be involved in decisions about their heritage and how we manage change. A good example of this recently is when constituents as well as heritage experts and bodies wrote to me concerned that Westminster City Council was not, in their view, giving enough consideration to the historic significance of Victorian gas-powered lamps in their plans to replace them with LED replicas. There are now very few functioning gas lamps left in Westminster. Each in their own right are works of art and pieces of our history, surviving the Blitz and London's urban revolution. But not all of them will survive due to the council's diktat to replace them with LED lamps. Thankfully, the brilliant London Gasketeers, a fantastic group of locals, are rallying to save these historic lamps. I met with the London Gasketeers on Maunsell Street in Westminster to show my solidarity with their cause, along with many locals. Many of these local people have never been on a campaign before, and they were delighted to be supporting the London Gasketeers. It is a cause which gained a wide range of support. Everyone from myself and the president of the GMB union, believe it or not, Mr Deputy Speaker. Historians, actors, cabbies, heritage experts, and most importantly, a diverse mix of Westminster residents who care passionately about their local heritage. And we have been successful, and I pay tribute to the London Gasketeers, and I'm delighted to see many of them in the public gallery this afternoon. Now, things like gas lamps might seem trivial to some, but like it or not, they are our material history. And people care because Westminster's heritage belongs to everyone. Issues like this matter to our overall social landscape. This is so important because London is a city where history and modernity remain intrinsically linked. The same can be said for urban development. Consider Soho. Soho has always been characterised by its narrow streets, which lend it a friendly, human scale. This is part of Soho's material history. However, things like the pavement licensing scheme, which might have been a great offer during COVID and was an emergency lifeline to many local restaurants and bars, it could now have a detrimental effect on this historic streetscape if it becomes permanent without any protections in place. This is why I'm calling for the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities to ensure guidance to the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill is clear when it comes to the conditions on which licences are granted. It is really important that local councils have the flexibility to determine where it is appropriate to have a licence and where it is not. Beyond the principal argument on access, we need to ensure our streetscape is consistent with Soho's conservation area status, respecting Soho's unique history and character. We must preserve elements of material history and evolve sensitivity in places which already have protection like Soho's conservation area or deserve protection like Westminster's Victorian gas lamps or London's historic buildings and places. Mr Deputy Speaker, we know that it is the preservation of our heritage and cultural assets which draw millions of tourists to London every year. A Visit Britain survey found that the vast majority of tourists see Britain as a place where heritage meets vibrancy and modernity. The same can be said for our cultural institutions, as 15% of international tourists attend a play, musical, opera or ballet. I, for one, am incredibly proud of the vibrant arts and culture offer in my constituency, much of which can be found in the historic West End, dating back to the 1600s. In fact, according to the Office of National Statistics, 8% of the UK's arts and culture businesses are based in the cities of London and Westminster. That's around 2,500 businesses. There is no doubt that the past few years have been extremely difficult for the arts and culture sector, and the commercial uncertainty of the current climate has not helped. Rising global inflation and consistent train and tube strikes all have a knock-on effect, hampering the recovery of this £2.4 billion sector. We saw during the pandemic the fragility of this industry. We cannot be complacent. We must protect our cultural assets. After all, heritage and theatres bring in £890 million a year, with over 16 million people attending a London theatre last year. To support the sector, we need to be working with the theatre sector in London to develop a strong UK talent pipeline through investment in the arts premium and the development of the culture education plan. My hope is that this will mean we can make sustainable, evidence-based decisions so we can preserve our culture and heritage while enabling people to enjoy them. While I'm on this point, Mr Deputy Speaker, though London is not part of the new Levelling Up agenda per se, it does form the heartbeat of British artists and culture, and we do risk losing these historic cultural institutions at our peril. We saw this with the Art Council's rash decision to cut funding to the English National Opera, based in the London Coliseum, not far from here. This decision would have seen the loss of a national icon, which gave local people so much. Not just the world-class opera performances, but also the local initiatives that they provide, such as the ENO's Breathe programme, which supports those suffering with long COVID. Here I urge the Minister to reaffirm the government's commitment to the arts and cultural sector, and in particular to the West End. Mr Deputy Speaker, we cannot forget the strength of this sector as an entrepreneurial and SME-led economic driver, locally, nationally and globally. And for these reasons, I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to speak today on the importance of protecting heritage assets in London. Since London's founding in 14 AD, actually in my constituency, in what is now the square mile in the City of London, this has been an ever-changing metropolis. Each generation has added its own personal touch, culminating in hugely diverse and historic modern city. Now more than ever, it is our duty to ensure that we do not lose what makes London London. Therefore, we must be proactive in protecting our cultural assets, from the West End to the wider historic fabric of London, which is becoming increasingly under threat. So I urge the Minister to reaffirm her commitment to protecting our heritage assets for future generations, and I ask that she work with London's cultural sector to stimulate growth, encourage tourism and safeguard the industry. London's historic assets are at risk of being lost to history. Mr Deputy Speaker, we cannot allow this to happen.
Minister, Julia Lopez.
Thank you, and I am very, very grateful to my honourable friend, the Member for Cities of London and Westminster, for calling what is a wonderful debate and for so superbly highlighting London's great, very rich heritage, its wonderful villages, and of course the importance of protecting historic assets for the benefit of present and future generations. And like her, I absolutely adore London's history. It's a pleasure to see her passion for her constituency again after her contribution to last week's debate on the lease of London Zoo. And I've covered this debate and that on behalf of Lord Parkinson, who covers the arts and heritage portfolio for the department. But these are all fascinating diversions from my own portfolio on data and digital infrastructure, and I'm also very glad to say that I've now taken on the tourism briefs for DCMS, and I think with the creation of the new department, I think you will see tourism play an increasingly important role within DCMS's work. As she has said, our heritage is an essential part of our cultural landscape, our economy and our country, and it's both globally renowned and world-leading, playing a vital role in communities across the UK, making our places great to live, work and to visit. Now, my honourable friend has a significant number of these impressive heritage sites in her own constituency, including, of course, the beautiful Westminster Abbey, amongst others, including the building in which we stand today. Her constituency contains more than 3,900 listed buildings, scheduled monuments and registered parks and gardens combined. And it's a fun coincidence, as she says, that this debate takes place in English Tourism Week. And the Honourable Lady will agree, I hope, that the UK's tourism offer is truly world class, and I had the pleasure this morning to visit her own constituency and visit the Goring Hotel, who were very complimentary about her own efforts to champion the hotel sector. They are doing some fantastic work supporting young people into hospitality jobs, and as she highlighted in her own contribution, the sector has been tremendously resilient after some very, very difficult years, and as it's Tourism Week, I want to pay tribute to everybody in that sector who have done such incredibly demanding jobs throughout the last 3 years. Our tourism landscape is iconic, from historic buildings and incredible scenery to culturally vibrant cities and world-leading hospitalities, and not just here in Westminster. And I love the earlier plug for Strangford. If that's where we're going, I hope you do not mind if I encourage members to sample the delights of my own constituency of Hornchurch and Upminster, whether that's the vibrant Queen's Theatre, and I note what she says about levelling up, but I'm very pleased to say that the Queen's Theatre was a beneficiary of levelling up within London with a great grant from the Arts Council. Also our wonderful green spaces in Dagenham Park, the Manor, Thames Chase Forest, and heritage assets like Upminster Tithe Barn and its windmill. It's undeniable that heritage sites are absolutely vital to our tourism industry and a really tangible way to showcase our rich history. And of course, we want these sites to be around in the future for our children and our grandchildren to learn from and be inspired by, of course.
She was drawn out of the Arts Council lottery and won a prize. And I'm pleased to say that my theatres also did not have their grants cut. But the loss of the Colosseum and the ENO is a grave blow to the whole of London, indeed to the whole country. And I wonder to ask her again if the government will use its best endeavours to ensure that that very misguided decision by the Arts Council is reconsidered.
Minister.
Well, I understand. I mean, honourable members have made their feelings very clearly known about the decision by ACE on the ENO. I know that a number of meetings have taken place, and there is, I believe, some transitional funding there. But I believe this will continue to be a subject of ongoing discussion between the two organisations, and I know that it's something that Lord Parkinson has been engaged in. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're protecting our historic buildings, statues, memorials. Local planning authorities are actually required to have special regard to preserving features of special architectural or historic interest contained within any building. And those buildings, statues and memorials of more modest interest can also be locally listed by local planning authorities. And we want to make sure that developers and local authorities take into account the integrity and preservation of heritage sites and the local area. When considering applications for planning permission, local authorities are required to take into account national policy, and that includes a clear framework on the proposals liable to result in substantial harm to or loss of a Grade 1 or Grade 2 listed buildings. In some cases, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, who retains the power to take over planning applications rather than letting the local authority take over, can take a final decision on some of these matters, and that is done in exceptional circumstances. But you will have seen a number of cases within, the honourable friend will have seen a number of cases within her own constituency where that has taken place over the years. I enjoyed her reference to the Gasketeers campaign, and as my honourable friend for the City of London set out, there's often a tension between development and heritage, and this is brought into sharp relief by examples in her own constituency, including the planned redevelopment of the City of London Liverpool Street Station, or proposals, as she sets out very articulately, to replace gas-powered lamps in Westminster with modern LED lighting. And as I was, just before this debate, I was at a tourism reception in the House of Commons, at which a lady thrust into my hands a little card telling me that Beverley in East Riding also has some of the oldest gas street lamps still in situ. So it seems that Westminster has a level of competition here in its own heritage. And so I give a shout out to them. But as I say, there are tensions between conserving the significance of historic buildings and their modernisation to make them fit for purpose for future generations. And that's why it's vital that Historic England, which is our expert heritage advisors, and planning authorities work constructively with development teams to facilitate creative solutions to resolve some of those tensions. But if I may, I'd like at this point also to name check Tim Briers, who is a key member of the Gasketeers campaign. He is a map and bookseller from Cecil Court. I first came across Tim during a campaign to save Cecil Court, which is a gloriously unique street within Westminster, and he then went on to sell me a beautiful silk pocket map of London in the 1800s, and it's something that I treasure very much, and I commend him for his enthusiasm and all the work that's happened under the Gasketeers campaign. Now, I understand that after... Hello, Tim. I understand that after a concerted campaign and pressure and support from the honourable lady, honourable friend for Cities of London, Westminster, the council has seen the light or the gas light and paused what they were doing. And Heritage England has now offered to identify a way forward, and they are encouraging listing applications, which they will be prioritising. And I understand that a site visit has also been undertaken. They'll be engaging also on the redevelopment plans for Liverpool Street Station, also in the Honourable Lady's seat. Looking especially at the station, but also the Great Eastern Hotel. And having sat on the planning committee for the neighbouring borough of Tower Hamlets, I fully understand some of the tensions that are there and some of the things that we have managed to save for London's historical fabric from rather ugly and unpleasant development over the years. And I think also of campaigns on the Fruit and Wool Exchange, and she also cited some of the campaigns in relation to Smithfield, I think back with some concern with some of the original proposals for Smithfield, which were not sympathetic. And I genuinely believe that actually preserving this historic fabric can really enhance and probably, no doubt, increase the value of some of these developments. And I think that if there's sensitive approach is taken, I don't think there needs to be an either-or in terms of the protection of heritage and the ability for developers to make a profit. Now, as she will be aware, it's a criminal offence to demolish a listed building or to carry out works of alteration or extension that affect its character without the permission of a local council. And a recent example of a local authorities playing that critical role was the reopening of the Tavern Inn, a London Grade 2 listed pub that was 6 years after its illegal demolition. Now, in that case, the owners were ordered to rebuild it brick for brick following a planning enforcement ruling. And it's hoped that cases like these will really prevent developers demolishing other sites without relevant permissions. She will also be aware of Historic England's Heritage at Risk programme, which gives us as a department a strategic overarching view on the overall state of England's historic sites, and that identifies sites that are most at risk of being lost as a result of neglect, decay or inappropriate development. Every year, Historic England updates that register, and the end result is a dynamic picture of the sites most at risk and most in need of safeguarding for the future. Now, as she says, there are 16 at-risk sites within the cities of London and Westminster, and Historic England is actively engaged with owners and local authorities to find solutions and ensure repairs. And I know that my honourable friend will be watching those 16 cases like a hawk. The protection of London's fantastic heritage also extends to supporting the capital's vibrant theatre scene and cultural offering, and recent government funding has ensured that access to arts and culture is not limited to the bright lights of the West End, but can be experienced by everyone. Investments in theatres across the country has increased through the the latest Arts Council England investment programme, both in terms of the number of organisations supported and, of course, the volume of funding, which is now more than £110 million each year to nearly 200 organisations. And there were also some positive announcements on the extensions of tax reliefs in the budget. That's on top of the unprecedented £1.5 billion culture recovery fund, through which over £270 million was given to support almost 700 theatre organisations across England during the pandemic. Now, of course, it goes without saying that the protection of heritage and cultural assets for the benefit of future generations requires people to work in them and for children to learn and understand their heritage. We recognise, as she's highlighted, the importance of cultural education for the future of our world-leading arts and culture sectors in the UK, and we think that all children should be entitled to take part in those cultural enriching opportunities. They're an essential part, we believe, of a broad and very balanced education, and they support children's health, well-being and wider development. It's something that I feel particularly passionate about and that I'm working very, very closely with Lord Parkinson on as we work with the Department for Education in publishing a cultural education plan later this year. That plan aims to highlight the importance of high-quality cultural education in schools around the country, promoting their social value, but as the Minister for the Creative Industries, I also see it as critical to building our pipeline of talent into those industries which have skills shortages, as does the tourism industry. So in a nutshell, we are committed to making sure that our historic environment is properly protected, promoted and conserved for the benefit of present and future generations, but also because it's that heritage that draws visitors from every corner of the world, whether that's through the statutory functions that protect our most special historic buildings and ancient monuments, or through public bodies it funds like Historic England. My department seeks to protect and promote understanding of and access to our glorious historic environment, and I should like once again to thank my honourable friend for the City of London and Westminster for bringing the House's attention to this issue, and as ever for being a truly passionate advocate for London's heritage.
Question is that this House do now adjourn. As many of that opinion say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Order, order.